Okay, we are here with Miss Janie Luster, and we are in Dularge, Louisiana, also known as Terrio, on June the 10th, 2022. And can you please tell us your name and where we are today?
Yes, good morning. Janie Luster. I'm from Dularge, Ontario. Been raised here. I was born in New Orleans, and this is my home here.
You were born in New Orleans. Was that because your parents were living over that way, or?
Unfortunately, no. It was due to the fact that my mom had to have cesarean births, and down here the hospitals didn't do that. Only, for those that could afford it. So they went to charity hospital, the women down here. And so, a lot of our people were born in New Orleans or were born here in the communities by midwives. But like I said, unfortunately, my mom couldn't have us by natural birth. She had to have a C-section. So, by the time she found this out, we had lost, our first brother in a sense. He was born and didn't make it because of that. So.
Wow. Can you tell us about your mom, what her name is, and where she was born and raised?
Yeah, Mom was born, I want to say, in Dulac, if I'm not mistaken. Probably with my great-grandmother. She was a midwife, and Mama, she was known for so many things. It would take the whole day and more to just tell you about a little bit about her. But she was born in Terrebonne Parish in Dulac, and like I say, my grandparents divorced when she was about 9, and she was raised by her dad. So she learned a lot of the ways from her dad, and also on her mother's side of the family too. Like I say, the great-grandmother was from my grandmother's side, and she was a midwife and traiteuse. So Mama learned a lot of her plants and treating, from her. So, like I said, they had a rough life. My dad had a similar life. His mother passed away when he was about 9. So, and eventually they met and married and had 3 children. And here we are. But difficult life, but very learning through life. The way of life down here is so different than, say, if they were, from the New Orleans area. It would have been so different. Down here, like we say, how you can live off the land. It's almost you born into it in a sense.
So true. Just getting Tammy to turn the air conditioner off. So the sound. Stop. Should I pause it? Oh, there we go. So can you tell us about can you tell us your mother and your father's names?
Yeah. Mary Pearlie Verrett, and John Gustave Verrett. They were distant cousins. And I just found this out. They always did say they were related, but at a distance, but I actually didn't know how, but I connected the dots, not prior to Hurricane Ida. I had worked on that. So I have to go back and complete my work to see, how we all related, on both sides of the families there. But yeah.
And has your family been here between Dulac and Dularge?
Yes. Really, on my mom's side of the family, they came from an area called Mauvais Bois. They had, a whole village there of our people, and they had everything they needed. And it was like a area where the land was high, that they, like a ridge. And they even had a sawmill out there that today, if you can make your way out there, it's only by boat, you will find some pieces of that sawmill, which is really interesting. And then you hear the stories of Mauvais Bois. It means bad woods, mauvais, bad, bois, wood. And a lot of the stories, ghost stories. I have a cousin that he will bring you there, but he will not if you want to spend the night. He says, I'll gladly leave you there and come back to pick you up in the morning. So a lot of good stories out there. But when our people left that area, they either went to the Morgan City to the west, or to the next point of living was Frederick Point, as they call it today, or they would say La Pointe. And they lived there for a while, especially on my mom's side of the family. And then they came to this area, which is known as Bayou du Large, moved a little bit more to the east, in a sense. But yeah.
And why were they making that migration from Mauvais Bois to La Pointe to here? Was that?
That's a very good question. They never did say. Maybe as other people came in, maybe. Maybe they were forced to leave their areas, and then you think those areas also were rich in oil. So you had the industries coming in as far as the oil field. Where my grandfather lived, on my mom's side of the family, on the side of the Intracoastal, he lived there for over 30 years, called it his home. He had a little camp boat, and he would fish and hunt and trap right there. And then down the road, the oil companies had already drilled and were looking to drill more, and they came to him basically saying they were going to lease his land, and they actually, had him sign, and they actually, he's actually sold his rights to his property. As many cases that throughout this area, you hear stories like that. And but that was his way of life, from just south of Bayou Black to, he would fish, like I said, he raised my mother and her sister and her brother, and they would fish from here to Calumet in West Louisiana, and that's where her art of making moss styles started as a young child, not from the black moss, or Spanish moss that was cured, but from the gray moss that was on the trees, the live moss. And he would go sell the fish that he would catch to the market, and he would tell them, "Les enfants, vous allez rester droit ici." Children, you're going to stay right here. And they would amuse themselves by pulling the moss off the trees, and they would make moss styles. And my grandfather would always be in a hurry when he would come back and telling them, "Y'all need to get in the boat, get in the boat right now." And so they left all their makings behind, Mama had shared that story many times at festivals, how they would do that, passing the time while he was selling the fish at the market.
And she made moss dolls all her life?
Yes. Yeah. I guess I tried my hands at it after husband and I had looked at to collect the live moss and to sell it to the nurseries, but the buyer, you would have to fill up like a whole 18-wheeler trailer full before they would come down and pick it up. And so we were able to use part of where he worked, a little warehouse, to store the moss, but we had to go in there every other day to toss it to keep it alive. It's an air plant. And so I ended up getting sick, coughing and everything, and I said, no, this is not for us, you know, a lot of work. And so a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of money went into it. And so rather than let it go to waste, my parents encouraged me to cure it, you know, and both of them told me how to cure it. And we started curing it, you know, by putting it in the side of the bayou in the water, taking away the air supply. It would begin the dying process in the water, and then you would take it out and put it on the banks of the bayou. And again, there too, you would have to go and toss it and wet it again every so often, you know. The sun would dry the gray, and eventually it would fall, well, really rot all off, and you'd be left with that fiber that looks like hair. And that has to do a lot with what kind of day, what kind of weather you're going to have. The more sun, the faster the process. But on cloudy days, you know, time periods, it would take longer. Anywhere from 3 to 9 months, sometimes a little bit longer than 9 months, a whole year, for it to turn completely black. And so that's what we did. I started making moss dolls when I was working for the United Houma Nation, and we were getting orders in for the moss dolls, and I couldn't keep up. It was either work or the moss dolls, and then my mom quietly stepped in and started making them, and so I quietly stepped back and let her. She had such a talent when it came to making moss dolls, and also the clothing. Her style was different than from Miss Marie Dean, who would use the palmetto as a dress. And with Mom, where we lived, where we grew up, you could only get there by boat. The highway was across the bayou. And so I had my aunt on her side, my uncle on my dad's side, and my great aunt on my dad's side, all living in that little area. And so when the women in that area and on this bayou would have be pregnant, they would turn to her to make the clothing for the babies that were coming. So she had a talent there too. And so when it came to making the moss dolls, she made clothes for them. And that was one of my questions to her when I started working with the moss to make moss dolls. I said, did the dolls have clothes? She says, well, yeah, just like the Barbie dolls today that y'all have. And so, like I said, but hers were totally different than some that I've seen people do. They were clothed to the T. Some of the articles of clothing that you didn't even see underneath. They had the little undergarment, the little panties, all made by hand. And like I said, why did she do that? It was because, you know, the love. And, you know, I'm just thinking now, it was probably because they had to do with so little growing up on the side of the bayou. She would tell me that, you know, people would give them clothing, and she would jump there and make clothing for herself and her sister, you know, out of fabric or dresses that people would give them that maybe didn't fit them, and she would cut them and sew them. So she sewed from a young age. And I think that showed through her moss dolls, you know, making sure that they had everything, every piece of clothing that was needed. And we grew up, myself, always wearing like an undershirt, underneath our clothes to keep our chests warm in the wintertime especially. They believed in that. So, but I'm just realizing that right now, where that came from.
Yeah. So she taught you how to make the moss dolls.
Yes.
And did you make moss dolls as a little girl too?
Not really. Not
it was
really.
When you were older.
Yeah, as I was older.
Yeah.
And like I said, but heard the stories of them, how they made moss dolls, when they were living with my grandfather,
Yeah, I've heard that story. So yeah, well, can you tell us a little bit about the traditional art that you have been making, and knowing that it's coming from these deep roots from the bayou and your mom and your father too? Can you just share with us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I do the Houma half-inch coal basket made out of palmetto, and as Ann had said, that was in the fall of 1992 that Mr. Richard Kahn had come down to teach us how to weave this basket. Miss Oradell Mars wrote the book J'entends la chanson des Houma, or I Hear the Song of the Houmas, and we had the opportunity at one time with Claude Medford that married into the Coshada tribe, and I just recently found out that he was Choctaw, and he was going to come down. He had contacted Miss Marie Dean to see if we could find the baskets in the communities, and we inquired, but the only thing that we found was memories of a basket, but not the actual basket. And so Miss Marie wrote back to him, and so with that information, he had agreed to come down to teach us how to do this basket. And so we're excited, to have the opportunity, because sometimes when you lose something, especially with the Indian culture, it's gone. It's hard to come back, get it back. And so here we were waiting, and before it happened, he passed away, and we were so disappointed. But here comes Miss Oradell Mars into our lives, and she had already found our baskets in the museums. In Denver was a collection of them. Tulsa, the Pipiti Museum in Boston has one, and there's a couple other places that I don't remember right now, but she had found them. And so she became good friends with Mr. Kahn and brought him down when she released the book. And August of 1992, we were hit with Hurricane Andrew, and that was the first year that I flooded, only 2 inches of water at that time. And I think that's important to note, because that was 1992, and you think about climate change, and I have seen from 2 inches to 3 feet of water in my home. But like I say, that day, my grandmother was living with my mom. I had the 3 daughters and the 1 son. We made our trip down there, and we needed it as a family, because we not only flooded, my mom's home flooded, and that was the last storm that the little house that we grew up in endured. The floodwaters couldn't be repaired any longer, and so my dad also passed away for Hurricane Andrew, so my mom used her flood insurance money and the life insurance for my dad to build her a new house, and that didn't happen until a few years later. But like I say, as a family, we needed that road trip, as we would call it today. Went down there, and it was really nice to get away from, here we are after Ida, and you still see all the devastation, and it was good to get away from it all. And my grandmother looked on as Mr. Khan came to show her, and he came down with a ribbon and a rope. And he didn't know, he showed me the basket, and he didn't know what the material that the palmetto was wrapped around, and I knew it was palmetto, so we were able to identify the basket as all palmetto, which was really unique. And so, like I said, my mom looked on too. She tried her hand at it, even my girls, even Ann. But main thing, we got away, from all the devastation and the loss of my father that day. And to do something that, was culturally important to all of us. And to know now, today, that I'm the first weaver of that basket, since the early 40s is really unique. And I can say that Anne is the first traditional weaver of this basket, because I'll say I learned in a non-traditional way from the curator, and she learned from me. So very proud of that fact. And all my 3 girls can weave the basket, and even grandchildren now can do the basket also. So proud of that. And hopefully we don't lose it again, and we making sure that we don't by doing classes, to pass it on. It's so important because, I've heard so many Native people speak of basket weaving as your identity, and truly it is, our identity. The palmetto is, in a sense, in this basket, And I say this basket because we were the only tribe in the whole country to make this basket. And so it was laws, and we couldn't go to another tribe to say, how do we weave this basket? How do we learn? So it's very unique.
The basket found its way home.
Yes, it did. It did.
And can you tell us about your journey with the garfish scale art as well?
Yeah, like I said, the garfish, again, it's a family tradition for us, but also a native tradition, using garfish scales maybe in different ways with the tribes from the southeastern part of the country. My mom and dad married in 1944, and Mom could make flowers out of anything she put her hands on. And again, the way of life was trapping in the wintertime and leaving the home on Bayou du Large, and she wanted flowers for the camp. And she would use the scales from the garfish to make flowers using the tac grass, or the clay from the bayou side, to form a little ball and put the scales in there, and using a twig as the stem. So, she loved flowers, and she also used redfish and drum, the regular scale fish scales. She would use a little nail to pierce a hole through it, and then she could sew these together and make flowers. So yes, she was really talented as far as figuring out a way how to make flowers. And like I say, that was in 1944 when her and Dad married, and then I had lived in the Bahamas the first year that my husband and I were married, and when I came back, my dad was fishing garfish, and my husband's from Tennessee. He never seen a monster like my dad was going to surprise him with. Dad had ran his lines that morning, and he knew he had a big one. And so he came home and got my husband and brought him to the back of our property. And he had my husband pull the line, and my husband couldn't believe, he thought he had an alligator. But it was alligator garfish, humongous. He had it might have been a 1968 Ford pickup, and back in those days, the Ford pickups had the 8-foot beds, and that fish's tail just droop down, so big one. And that's where I first seen the beauties of the scales, as we say. Amazed by the size of the scales, and then the story started flowing. Mom talked about how she would make flowers. My dad talked about how to cure them, and so he took the scales and brought them way to the back in the marsh area. They had constructed some kind of a deer stand, similar thing, but it was a stand that he could look out in the marsh also. So he filled that bucket up with those scales and put it up way on that stand, way up there. And the purpose of that was so different animals would not come and disturb them. And of course he had a lid on the bucket so the birds wouldn't come. And so very unique way. And as Ann said, very smelly. So he wanted to make sure it wasn't around the house. And then after several months, he went back and got them, and they were beautiful. White, and like I said, clean as could be, and, ready to process. And that's where Mom started telling me, this is, with everything y'all have today, she says, you don't have to use a tagras, you can use some of that nice glue that y'all have. And back then, we had the glue gun that came out also, and we started making flowers. And the rest is history, 4 generations strong. Mm-hmm. And so very proud of that. But the garfish was important to us. Even in the head of the garfish, my mom showed me that they had a bone in there that could be used as a spear point, perfect. And so we started saving those. I made talking sticks, in a sense. We used that as a talking stick. Also made spears. When I worked at Con Brude, I made 3 or 4 of them, and very unique. We would throw them, and it was, very interesting to see the interest in those bones and different shapes of bones that you could find, and even needles, to sew some of those bones from the fin area could be used as needles.
Wow.
A very, my mom and them were so intelligent when it came to using just about all parts of the garfish, but it mainly the meat. My mom would always smoke it,
How would she do that?
Well, similar to the people up north in Seattle and Washington, they would smoke it. They would slice the fish real thin, but not too thin where you would have a slab of fish that would be consistent and you would be able to hang it. And back then on the clothesline or a fence, clothesline seemed to work better. And especially in the March when you were getting some of the last cold fronts in and that windy weather. But she would salt it down first also and dry it, sun dry it and smoking it. And she used a drum to make her smoke. And my dad knew his woods as far as, what to use to smoke the wood. And ash was one of the trees that I remember that he would use even in barbecuing, later on. But, and then, doing cooking demonstrations with John Falls down in Dulac, and using a regular pit to smoke the garfish. People had come to view the taping of the shows that we had done with him, and then the stories there too flowed. Some of the people that had come remembered so and so across the street that would smoke the fish just like my mom did, and then as we ventured out, talking about the garfish, I realized that our Indian communities throughout our areas did the same thing, way of preserving. And then And of course, my mom and dad became good friends with a couple from New Orleans, Mr. Leon Berg. Uh, I have no idea the wife's name. We always called her Miss Leon. And so they traded, fresh fruits and vegetables from the French market, which Mom really didn't need the vegetables because they had their own garden, but the fruits were nice. And so in order to be able to keep some of the fresh fish and I guess venison, different meats, duck and things like that, they ended up getting her a freezer. And I can remember them crossing it on a boat, and like I said, and again, I go back to tell you that the way of preserving it was to salt down the meat. And after getting her freezer, she did it in the same way. Salted the meat, smoked it, wrapped it up in plastic, and put it in the freezer. And so old habits is sometimes hard to break, but it was a good thing for the fact that it was the traditional way of doing things,
Mm-hmm.
So, that speaks loudly to me that they kept these ways of life for us alive, as many other people have done too. But, I always say that my family, my parents were traditional people, in the way of life. But yet they moved on with time too, especially when it came to my brother Kirby and I getting an education. They left that way of life to a certain extent, because, in the wintertime, you would go out there 3 or 4 months at a time, and when we finally got the Indian schools, we were able to go to school, and they knew the importance of education, and so they didn't want to take us out of school for that time period. So my dad ended up getting a job in the oil field, but in the afternoon, especially in the fall, for the fall shrimping season, he would come in from work and we'd get in the boat and go to the dams, either trolling with the boat or by the dam with the cast net, and again, keeping our schedule in mind of getting up early to go to school, we wouldn't stay out there, too late, even though the shrimp were given sometimes. It was a heartbreaker to come in, but they wanted us to go to school, and so, like I said, the traditional way of life continued in the weekday or even on the weekend, So, and in the wintertime, they still trap. My mom and there were 2 other ladies that trapped behind our house, and they would meet in the marsh area, running their traps and everything. And it was very unique. And again, like I said, our area was, we didn't have a road, but they navigated the little canals, trainals as we call them, to go trapping. And then finally, when we got a road, along came other people, and the ladies would meet in the back, when running their traps. And one day the discussion was that, I'm not getting as many animals, nutras or muskrats in my trap. It looks like somebody ran my traps. And then one said, yeah, I seen 2 little boys with blonde hair, Shrejon, and they probably the ones running our traps. And sure enough, that's what it was. But like I said, a whole little trapping area by women, hardworking women.
Yeah.
And, I say, like with my mom, she did so many things, cooking, the sewing, the gardening, and still, my grandfather, my dad's dad, lived with us. He trapped also, my dad trapped. And when it came to skinning the animals, they would leave it to her because she was so fast at doing it. And I think I had shared the story that, you know, we had one fur buyer from the Bayou Lafourche area, and he loved my mama's furs, you know. And sometimes, you know, the fur had a little hole in it. She would take the time to take her needle and thread out and sew that. And so he would come down here and go to Dulac. He would do the back roads to the communities buying the hides. Well, on the crossroad between Dulac and Duloge, he ended up getting carjacked, as we say today. They took his money, they took his furs, left him there. And so, you know, the law was brought in, and so the law says, well, can you identify your hides, you know? And they were expecting him to say, no, well, you know, hides are hides. But he knew he had something special. He knew my mom's way of mending the hides. He says, well, if we can find them, if you can find them, I can identify them. And sure enough, they found them. And he identified them by my mom's furs because of the way she would sew them together. And he got some of the money back, but all of his hides back.
Wow.
And like I said, he would tell that story to many people, you know, how that happened.
Do you know what year or years, around what years it was when the fur trapping industry started to kind of sunset in the community? And was that something that your parents were concerned about or talked about, and that the buyers weren't maybe coming as regularly?
Mm-hmm.
Or,
yeah. Well, again, you know, being that my dad was employed by the oil field, the payback in those days wasn't that great, you know, for Indian people. And so this was another income that was important to them. And then when they started seeing the hides not being bought, you know, I guess they were shipped to France to be made into coats and everything. And so you saw the decline there, the price fell. At one time, you know, Mama could always get the best prices because of the way she would clean the hides and, like I said, sew them if they had any kind of default in them. You know, anywhere from $16 a hide to, you know, depending on what kind, you know, neutral hide was 16, otter and mink was much pricier. But when the price started going down, I think our people were still the last people to trap. And I would say that we started seeing that maybe in the late mid-60s and then to the 70s. And I can remember my uncle was probably the last one to still go trapping when it came to $1 a hide, you know, compared to the 16 and over. And his outlook was that that's $1 more in my pocket that I have than yesterday, you know. Still continuing, you know, even though the price wasn't there. But like I say, today, you know, the tails of the nutras bring in more than that $1 a hide. I heard $5 a tail, just for the tail, you know, because the nutria is such a pest, you know, that has added to the erosion of our communities down here. So, like I said, you know, that $1 a hide hurts so many people, you know, in keeping our traditional ways of life alive, you know.
Yeah.
But then when you don't have a market for the hides, you know, what are you going to do?
Right. Right. Well, speaking of markets, are there do you have a market for your artwork, and are there places where you go to sell, or buyers that you have that come to you?
Yeah, we have, Ann and I really have a couple of collectors that have come to us to buy our baskets. Then the festivals, we do the gorefish and the baskets also, but I don't find that the festivals are that good for the baskets, unless some of the buyers, the collectors come, and Natchitoches is where some of the collectors come in, which is really good, and you can get your price. Jazz Fest is a good one too for baskets, that they don't try to talk you down as far as prices, Garfish Jazz Fest, New Orleans Jazz Festival has always been good to me. With the Garfish, like I said, we used to bring my mom and dad, and the way they came into Jazz Fest, Kirby, my brother, was chairperson of the tribe at that time, that he got a phone call from Jazz Fest to see about getting some artists, up there. And so he asked Mom and Dad. Dad would do the palmetto hut. Mom would demonstrate the moss dolls. And so, like I said, that's how we started bringing them, because again, the lack of education with my parents, we drove them, children in tow, and I would do the gorefish flowers to help pay for the meals and the souvenirs, and back in those days, they weren't as strict as they are today as to what you're doing. And I say they got lagniappe because my mom was being paid, with Jazz Fest, they give you, they pay you to demonstrate, and they also house you. And so they got lagniappe with me because there I was demonstrating, making gorefish flowers. And then telling my stories, sharing my stories about how the scales were used as arrow points. And some people didn't believe that, and that's a story that came from my mom also. And I continued to share that story, and finally they acknowledged that. And working at Convoy Day at Rivertown with Greyhawk and his wife back then, she had to make a trip to Arizona, and I get a call midday, and she says, guess what I found? She had gone on what they call a dig, and she found gorefish scales out there. And so they were probably traded, probably for arrow points or jewelry is the other thing. Mm-hmm. You have to think of the line of jewelry that we didn't have the beadwork down here, so mm-hmm. It came from the natural forms, the gorefish or clam shells is what we use down here. Mm-hmm. But like I said, it was interesting to see that or hear that gorefish scales way in Arizona, how they got there. But again, trading, Yeah. So that was fascinating to see so many things that my mom shared with me, that story, the story of the turtle shell, with the Indian calendar on the shell. I was given a turtle shell at Jazz Fest the year after that my dad had passed. That year was 93 when I received that. And the woman that carved it, it was a turtle shell mask she made out of it. The eyes were carved, the nose, the mouth, very unique. And then she, at the top of the shell, she had drilled some little holes. And like I said, that was the year after Hurricane Andrew and losing my dad. And she came that morning to the tent and asked my mom, who was at the next table next to her. And Mom says, well, that's my daughter. She had asked Greyhawk that morning where was the elder's tent or the native tent. And so he directed her, and I wasn't there, probably after the kids or something. But she told my mom she would come back, and she did. Beautiful woman. She walked through that tent opening, dressed in white, light brownish blonde hair, had a smile, and we connected when, as she's coming, she's coming towards me, towards my table. And so she reached in her bag and said, "This belongs to you." It was that turtle shell mask, And she says, "I knew from the day that I started carving it, it wasn't mine to keep." And so she gave it to me and told me about the little points that were drilled that I could put tobacco, sage, or whatever, and said I would need the strength of the turtle. And I didn't quite understand that at that time, but looking back now at my life, that strength of that turtle really has come through for me. And I also received a story from my mom again. The turtle shell has the Indian calendar. And so she pointed out that on the turtle shell there's 13 large squares representing the Indian moons that Indian people would use. And today's calendar is 12 month. Back then it was the 13 moons. And today we still use the moon to do so many things by cutting the hair, trolling. One couple out in Dulac, they were supposed to come demonstrate filet making, but guess what? The full moon was that day, and they were out on that boat, firmly believing that 3 days before and 3 days after the moon is full, the shrimp will be there, So like I said, we still practice the way of the 13 moons, and those 13 moons are represented on that turtle shell. So, and then the little squares around the turtle shell represents the days, and usually 28 days. I've found some with more or less, and I said maybe leap year. But like I said, I told that to Miss Morris, about my mom's story about the Indian moon being on the turtle shell. And I didn't have an email back in those days, It wasn't until I worked for the tribe that I got one. But, she would call me and say, "Janie, I need for you to come and pick up something." And she had the story of the turtle shell from a northern tribe. Same story my mom had told me. Well, I can tell you, my mom did not read that in a book, because she could not read because they were denied of an education down here. So where did she get it from? Passed down from generation to generation. So, that's proof right there how history was passed down, things that we done in the past, how, they would speak of it and tell people how to do things. And it was through over stories like that,
Wow, so. I love that story. I want a turtle shell.
Well, to go a little bit beyond, so I got that in 1993. I had never gone to Natchitoches over there with Dr. Pete Gregory, and he's got a museum at the campus there. And I went in the first time, and of course they had a Houma half-ish basket. A lot of the work of Miss Marie Dean and her brother, Mr. Otwan, and another basket in there. I don't think they have any name on it, but beautiful basket. But also the work of Mr. Otwan with the elderberry trees, the blowguns, and he made rings out of the elderberry tree limbs. But what he had unique was a turtle shell mask. And that was really, I said, wow. So, and of course, Kirby is married to his daughter, Zoanna. And so when I came back, I had taken pictures. I said, "Did you know your dad made turtle shell masks?" And she really didn't remember. but I brought my mask with me when we did school presentations, and Kathy Verde and her husband Gene, Gene came out with the story that I have one of Mr. Otwin's turtle shell masks in my shed. So we, as Native people, also made turtle shell masks, you know, a form of mask, like the people up north, you know. So that was kind of unique also.
Wow.
You know, to know that Mr. Otwin not only did blowguns and weaved palmetto, but also did that art form too.
Well, just thinking about the passing down of stories and of knowledge and of skills. Yeah, I mean, I know that you are have been taught by your elders and taught your children and are teaching your grandchildren. But are there other people that you're working and sharing
Oh yes,
your work with?
yes. When this young man was in 9th grade, I worked with him, Rhett Williams, and he was like a sponge. He wasn't like your normal 9th grader that was just there to be there. He was there to learn. He was there to learn about his culture, and he wasted no time. And of course, you know, Ann and I were there. I was doing the basket, Ann was doing the garfish. Miss Rose Pierre was there and her daughter Maria doing basket weaving. And so I started him on my basket, and when I couldn't get to him right away, he would put that basket down and pick up Miss Rose's basket and start weaving on hers, or Zoe's basket. Same form with Rose and Zoe, in a sense. And never, you know, always so focused on what he was doing. Well, like I said, he caught on to the half itch and went home, cut his own palmetto, dried it and everything, and started making baskets. And this young man graduated from South Terrebonne, head of his class. And, you know, I spoke of our people, parents, grandparents not having the opportunity to have an education. This man, young man, and I say young man, had the choice. He was accepted at Harvard, and he chose not to go. He's going to Dartmouth. To have choices today, it's amazing for our young people, you know, to have that opportunity. And like I say, this young man just, you know, learned as much as he could on, we had maybe 3 days of that Indian education camp, and he was like a sponge. I worked also with Colleen Billiot from St. Bernard, and she too has learned. And then Ann and I have done quite a few workshops through Maida Owen's program with the Division of Art called Passing It On. And it's important that we equip our young people with the hurricanes that have come through. And it's not if we're going to have another one, it's when. We know that our people are moving. You know, they migrated south and now they're migrating back north. Hurricane Andrew, they moved to the north of the bayou rather than move away completely because their way of life was still down here. The fishing, their boats got left down here. Their homes were north of the bayou. Rita came in, Ike, then they started moving, you know, further out, north of the parish, north of the state, out of state. So it's important that we equip them to take their culture, to take the art of basket weaving with them. And after Hurricane Ida, Ann and I both lost our home, and I told Ann it's even more important now that we take a step back to tell them, if you move, when you move, are you gonna know where to harvest palmetto and how. So I started showing them, what the palmetto heart looks like, because it's not the leaf that's opened up that we use, it's the heart of the palmetto. And so by teaching them that, the other question is, will you have palmetto where you move, or are you going to come home to harvest your palmetto? So 2 important questions right there. And I have seen palmetto endangered since the mid-90s. I spoke of it. And it's not that the plants are dying out, but it's the erosion, the saltwater intrusion, and the biggest thing is construction. Construction of the levees out here. And, it's a fisherman's paradise, down here. So you have a lot of areas that are being developed where we used to harvest palmetto with my parents. And those days are gone, with the levee or construction, like I say. And I've, met many people say, oh, there's plenty of palmetto, but can we go there and harvest the palmetto? That's a big issue too. Just like with our cypress basket makers, which is just maybe 2 or 3 of them that's still making cypress baskets. A lot of cypress tree too, but can you go on that property and harvest palmetto and cypress trees?
Can you tell us about, I know the answer to this question, but can you tell us about what rights Houma people have to harvest anything in our territories, whether it be plant material or wildlife? Do Houma people have special rights to those resources?
No, we don't. We should, because we are a native people, and I think our people have always respected the fishing, the trapping, the seasons when all of this is done. We didn't need seasons as they have today, from this time period to that time period, you can't hunt this or that. Our people knew the natural way of hunting, the natural way of respecting the life cycle of an animal. As far as harvesting palmetto and cypress, you have to develop those relationships with those landowners if you're able to go out there, which we have, and it's getting more difficult to do that. Last November, I was told that and offered to go harvest palmetto on land, by someone that worked with my husband in the oil field many years ago. He has property on Upper Dulorge, and so he told me that whatever palmetto I need, he would be happy to let us go over there, or if I can show him what I need, he would get his people to get them for me. So that's unique, that's rare, because again, people are so afraid, lawsuits and things like that. But one thing that scares me more than anything than that, myself, when I harvest palmetto, I like to do it in the wintertime, because all those alligators, snakes, and bees and everything, guess what? They're not going to be there. Whereas in the summertime, and I can remember my oldest son, and I'm sure Ann shared the story about them harvesting palmetto with my husband and my dad. And when my son pulled, it was to harvest palmetto for a hut at one of the festivals. When he pulled the leaf of the palmetto with the machete right there ready, well, the snake was right there. And all he did was froze and said, "Daddy!" And so, he didn't move, and my husband came from behind and got the snake, But like I said, there's some dangers out there, You have to know what you're doing, and sometimes I always tell my children, you have to make a lot of noise, because the snakes are just as afraid as noise that you make and than anything, you know. So
Yeah. Uh-oh, our battery's low. We got 25%, but I think we can
Okay.
get there. Okay. I think you've answered a lot of these questions. How do you identify your work? As art or as craft?
Art.
Nice.
Art. I may have identified them as craft early on only by the influence of different people that saw them more as craft than art. But later on, as I continued to work with them, I did see them more as art than as crafts. Crafts, I think, when I think of craft, I think of a kit, you know. Today you can go Hobby Lobby, Michael's, and get a kit to make a dream catcher. Our art, you have to go out there and get it yourself. You can't buy the kits. So it's more art than craft to me,
Yeah, I agree. Would you like more opportunities to have venues or places where you could sell and share your work publicly?
Yes. I think those doors are opening now, and that's what in more ways than ever, I think, now that I'm almost in that age bracket, I can look back and say, I wish I had this opportunity like 20 years ago. It was harder for us to establish ourselves as artists in our own community than it was just outside of our communities, New Orleans or North Louisiana or other states. And we've had the opportunity to travel to Canada, to France with our work, and that spoke a lot, But as an elder, I've had people come to me now and offer me, just for my knowledge. That wasn't happening years ago. And that's just fascinating to me. And that's why I like to encourage my children and my grandchildren to continue learning about our culture. The old ways, the new ways, even filet making has changed through the years, but it's still being done, and I think you can get from point A to point B and have the same product. It's important. And to know the history of that product is even more important, I think. Especially the filet, the sassafras trees, that's one of the plants that has been lost with the hurricanes, with saltwater intrusion, because with the hurricanes we flood and that salt water stays in the ground. And like I say, my oldest son is 42, and I have a picture of him when he was about 7 years old, standing by my mom's filet trees. And we call them filet trees rather than sassafras trees because we always knew it was filet that was going to come from them, But yeah, like I say, it's very interesting to see through the years to take the knowledge of my parents and put it to use, to tell their stories, and to have the audience for it also. People have come, they came to listen to my mom and dad, and now we in those same footsteps, and now I can see Anne and her family doing the same thing that we did. I traveled with Anne to the festivals because, driving has become a little bit harder at this age, especially at night, maneuvering things during the day. So I see the same thing that we did as a young family that she's doing today with us, with me,
Yeah. Are there any other artists that, besides your mom and Anne, but artists that whose work you admire and who have helped to inspire you or encouraged you?
Yeah, I say the Billiard family from Dulac, just to see the work that they've done through the years and how they kept it alive for us is so important. Miss Marie Billiard-Jean, well-recognized artist, from Dulac, that whole family. Twin brother was a boat maker, Mr. Lawrence, Mr. Moot Billiard, Mr. Otwan. And Mr. Lawrence, Mr. Moot was her twin brother, by the way. And that whole family, kept our things alive, our art. The blowgun making, again, that was Mr. Otwan, so yeah, that family. I just
The fishermen are
am
here.
so grateful that, they have done that for us, kept that alive for us.
Yeah. Maybe I should pause this.